reason at the foundation of these things and of our own, and when such a groundless and enigmatic or self-opaque state of our very existence in the midst of the great doubt deprives us of the value and the meaning of all things, we are put in the position of vacuous nothingness, in Japanese, kyomu no tachiba. Thus, in this second position, we find ourselves and things to be nameless and uncanny for a theoretical or objectifying attitude of consciousness. This means that here, so in the position of vacuous nothingness, both we and the things return to our and their real or primordial way of being, the way of being which makes us and the things essentially transient and void of identity. Yet, for Nishitani, the ephemeral or non-being wise character of all things that we realize in the position of vacuous nothingness implies that, albeit covertly, we still see such ephemerality from the position of being in general, and consider it to be non-being opposed to being, or vacuous nothingness as a negation of being. If we further negate this very nothingness that negates being, then we reach the third position, which Nishitani famously calls the position of emptiness, fu no tachiba in Japanese. Due to time constraints, let me now address only one trait, one feature of the position of emptiness, a trait that I consider to be the most important. According to Nishitani, this position makes, this position of emptiness makes it possible that everything recovers its once lost distinct identity again by concentrating and keeping itself in its place in the world. However, this doesn't mean a simple repetition of the system of being of the first position. Importantly, Nishitani maintains that here, in the third position, in the position of emptiness, the concentrative power enables everything in its own place, not only to unify and establish as a unique being, but also to gather all other things around itself. To put it another way, under these circumstances, everything is the center of the world, the absolute center which subordinates all other things to itself. At the same time, despite their absoluteness, such centers in plural of the world are subordinate to each other and mutually sustain their unique beings, thereby forming the very world as one. Briefly, everything at the center of the world stands also in the position of servant to all other things, while remaining the master to these other things. As we know, Nishitani calls this unique kind of interdependent relationship among all things in the world a circuminsectional interpenetration. In Japanese, 無意語的促入 or エゴ的挿入、無意語的挿入 or エゴ的挿入。 Given the above rough sketch of religion and nothingness, we can, I believe, work out 2 points of Nishitani's thinking on emptiness. First, besides the field of reason, the field of sensation is sharply contrasted with the field of emptiness. As long as the former, the field of sensation, is a sort of the system of being in which the subject-object relationship features. For instance, we can clearly see this contrast from the following passage. Quote, "The field of emptiness stands opened at the very point that things emerge into being. We are used to representing things, however, as objects on the field of sensation or the field of reason, thus keeping these things, at a distance from ourselves." Unquote. Second, Nishitani thinks of the previously mentioned circumstantial relationship, the relationship which renders all things masters and servants to one another, to be only possible on the field of emptiness, only possible on the field of emptiness, unquote. In this sense, we can say with Nishitani that the position of emptiness is appropriately marked as, quote, "the field of circumstantial interpenetration," unquote. The second section, the later Nishitani's ideas of emptiness, a comparison of emptiness and sameness and religion and nothingness. In this section, I would like to confront religion and nothingness with Nishitani's last treatise, Emptiness and Sameness, concerning the notion of emptiness. According to the author, Nishitani, it is emptiness in emotional situations, in Japanese, 上位的状況における空, that is the main topic of the treatise. Nevertheless, it seems that in this text, we cannot find an explicit explanation as to the very theme anywhere. So, as far as I know, at least. What does Nishitani mean by the emotional emptiness? According to my reading, emptiness and sameness provides us with a clue to answer this question when it interprets the medieval Japanese Buddhist monk, Master Myoe's waka poems. In this context, Nishitani writes, quote, "Emptiness or the sky is a place where a door opens for the first time to a true communication of the heart. It is a space where the solidarity of reciprocal connection is truly possible," unquote. With this description in mind, let us understand the emotional emptiness as a place of feeling or atmosphere for our, quote, "direct communication from heart to heart," unquote. This interpretation seems to have the advantage of clarifying why Nishitani focuses on the 1690, sorry, this is a typo, not Renko, but Renku. So please replace O with U. It's the 1690 Renku poetry written by Basho and Matsuo Basho and his disciples. Supposedly, The reason is that this Renku poetry is a collaborative work by multiple poets who gather and concentrate on mutual heart communication with changing atmosphere, changing from moment to moment, changing atmospheres, which they share with one another. If I am not mistaken, by way of interpretation of Basho's Renku poem and its unusual thread of text, Bun, as the logos of language in its original form, or the principle of interpermeative images. Emptiness and sameness attempts to show that the place of the emotional emptiness means the world of non-obstruction between principles and things, in Japanese, Riji Muge. We can compare this world, the world of non-obstruction between principle and things, to the position of emptiness as religion and nothingness discusses it, because both of them render all things interdependent and interpenetrative under the rule of the principle of circumcision. Much more importantly, however, unlike the author of Religion and Nothingness, who regards the position of emptiness as the ultimate position, the highest position, the later Nishitani doesn't absolutize the world of non-obstruction between principle and things. In his new view, based on the Huayan school, or in Japanese, Kegon school of Sino-Japanese Buddhism, this world, namely the world of non-obstruction between principle and things, is, fundamentally speaking, none other than the world of non-obstruction among things, in Japanese, Jiji Muge, because it is the latter that makes the former possible. This is the first answer to the question 1. What then is a world of non-obstruction among things? According to my interpretation, it consists of a totally empty space, or a sheer opening on one hand, and myriads of things in the state of bare facticity on the other hand. So it consists of these two elements, two ingredients. The point is that here, in this world, there is no unifying principle that could bridge the gap between the empty space and the things left in the primordial disorder, and the gap among these things that separate apart from each other without any nexus. In other words, what is characteristic of the world of non-obstruction among things is non-circumcision, in Japanese, hu-uigo, or hu-ego, or the state of absolutely solitary self-enclosure, in Japanese, jikonai heiza. We have seen that the place of the emotional emptiness implies the world of non-obstruction between principle and things, and that this circumcisional world of non-obstruction between principle and things originates from the non-circumcisional world of non-obstruction among things. From this, hence, it follows that the place of the emotional emptiness consists ultimately, finally, in the world of non-obstruction among things. What does the late Nishitani mean when he connects the emotional emptiness with things, or the most basic world? Here, it is noteworthy that in his short article titled On Awareness, in Japanese, 核について, in 1979, the late Nishitani stresses a close relationship between things and sensational knowledge or sensation. Although, as mentioned earlier, religion and nothingness links sensation to the position of consciousness, which is naturally far from being fundamental. And this is the second answer to the question one. Thus, it can be said that while combining emptiness with things, the late Nishitani suggests also a special connection between emptiness and sensation. What then does this connection imply? According to my reading, for the late Nishitani, sensation is the most fundamental activity of living things. It expresses the sheer force of their life, the spontaneous life force from within, only for the sake of the very life, and without any other purposes and reasons. Interestingly, in his Otani lectures, especially in 1977 to 81, Nishitani repeatedly suggests that such life force, in Japanese, 生命の力, must have something to do with emptiness. From this inspiring idea of the late Nishitani, we can learn that it is worthwhile considering emptiness further in relation to life, sensation, and the facticity of things in the world. This is an answer to the question two. Thank you so much for your attention.
So, this is it. Can you stop sharing?
Yes.
I will take.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So let's start with discussion questions from the room or from people joining Zoom.
When I was listening to you,
Yeah.
I realized again
Yeah.
that Japanese words
Yeah.
and word association goes in a very different direction
Mhm.
from the way the mind goes when it follows the word association of their translations.
Uh-huh.
So, for example, you talk about relating emptiness to things.
Yes.
Okay.
And I mean, so by things, I mean G.
Yes, of
Koto,
course.
yes.
Yes. And that was the point.
Yes.
And you talk about sensation as primary,
Yes.
but our idea tends to focus on things as objects
Yes.
and sensation as the
Yes.
sensation of objects.
Mhm. Yes.
And I think that causes some confusion. So so it's not butsu butsu, it's jiji.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yes.
But let me go back a little bit. When we translated,
Yes.
or I helped to polish the translation of religion and nothingness,
Mhm.
we had two problems. First of all,
Yes.
the word nothingness. Okay, mu. The German had already used nichts for it, and the German Schinziger had translated that as nothingness, and it had become standard. So we said, well, okay, so we stayed with the nothingness.
Mhm.
The second was the word kyomu,
Uh-huh.
for which there was no real translation. Van Brack tried to use the Latin word nihilum, but that's just a Latin for nothingness. So actually, I went to the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary, and spent a day looking around at words, and I came upon an old word that had died called nihility. And that seemed perfect. So I used that word and resurrected, and now it's become standard. But still, there's a problem with these translations.
Mhm.
And I want to talk about that for a moment.
Mhm.
Now, in Japanese, there is no word for nothing, no word for nowhere, no word for no one, and no word for never. They can only negate not ever, not a thing, not a place, not a person, but they have no words for that. In German, of course, we have niemand, nirgend, right? Nichts. French also has words except for no one. They have to use personne, so they don't really have a good word for no one. But our languages tend to carry those without any problem. But Japanese doesn't have those words. So what does it do? It takes a verb and adds it to it. So, for example, the word no non-being, which we have in Western languages, doesn't really exist in Japanese. They created a word, well, two words, fuzonzai or hisonzai.
Yes.
But those are inventions that came after the study of Plato and Aristotle. So Japanese adds the word nai, mu, as a negation. And nai is an adjective verb. I mean, as you know, adjectives in Japanese are also verbs. So nai is an adjective. So that's its logical function, is to negate something. Darimo nai, dokomo nai, itsumo nai, like that. That they can do. But what do you do when you have kyomu? It causes the first problem. So I think the correct translation of nothingness is that is from the context in which it's used, Japanese context. The correct translation would be knownness. In other words, you make a substantive of an adjective verb. It's a knownness. And kyomu would be a vacuous knownness. So knownness is, in other words, is not negative. And to show that it's not negative, he talks about negative knownness or kyomu. But mo itself, as a substantive, is positive. So the negation does something positive. It doesn't negate. It's not just logical. As a substantive. So Nishitani has this saying that the self becomes nothingness. That's how we translate it in religion and nothingness. The self becomes nothingness. But what it really means is that the self becomes a no oneness. It doesn't become a no thingness. It becomes a no oneness. So, like the final basho of Nishida is a nowhereness. The Eien no Ima is a neverness, not everness. Substantial being is a no thingness, a nothingness. So, concrete objects come to our mind when we think of Jiji Muge. When you think of no interference and no obstruction between things, we immediately think of things in the world, but it also means places and times and people, also between people, because when Nishitani talks about the Jiji Muge, he immediately talks about Butsu Butsu in the sense of the Hotoke. right? So it's also between persons who are a self of no-ness or a no oneness. So to talk of no oneness, nowhereness, neverness, nothingness, these are different concepts. And I think the mind, when we hear in English nothingness, kind of forgets about space and time and individuals. It thinks of things. In Japanese, I mean, when he reads the word nothingness, he doesn't hear that bias. Even though it's an English word, he doesn't follow that bias. His mind goes a different direction. He's including everything, time and space and individuals and consciousness. So I think this is just a problem of translation that I don't know any way to get around. I mean, knownness is not a nice word. Nothingness isn't either, but knownness is not a good, and no oneness and no placeness, no whereness. But we have to remember that that's all caught in there. So when I'm listening to him and listening to when he talks about the concept of nothingness, I'm hearing something maybe differently from what the normal English reader would hear. And he certainly doesn't have those biases because he can see the mood behind the word nothingness. We can't. Well, just a comment.
Thank you so much. And if I may respond to your wonderful comment, or to your question concerning the relationship between emptiness and things, ji, or sensation, kankaku. Yes. According to my interpretation, this is a very point of the late Nishitani on the notion of emptiness. And this is a point that distinct the position of late Nishitani from the position of Shukyo Doranka, religion and nothingness. And I think that I personally think that ji or koto, so translated as things in my presentation, and this koto means, as you correctly mentioned, this koto means first. Primarily, something happens or something occurs. So this is an event and not things. And so this meaning, happening, event, this meaning of koto, so distinct this word koto from a mono. And so this is right. But if I may go back to ancient Japanese, for example, in the 6th or 7th or 8th century, so the times of Manyoshu, the first anthology of waka poets, and at that time, there was a very different pronunciation of the word koto. So at that time, they pronunciated this word as kata. So not koto, but kata. So what does this mean? Of course, I'm not an expert of the ancient Japanese. I'm not a linguist, but as far as I know, this ancient word kata this means that, or this can be translated, literally translated as something, spoken. So, 語られたもの. So, something which is expressed verbally or linguistically. So it's not just an object that we simply see, but it means something which is expressed in languages, already expressed in languages.
I always heard that it was the other way around, that the association with words came afterwards.
Mm.
And I understood that kata was basically the Japanese equivalent of shiki.
Sorry?
Of shiki.
Shiki?
Shikisoku.
Ah, okay. Mhm.
And from that, the more general word of shiki, it was also applied to language. But maybe that was just my assumption. But maybe it's backwards. Yeah.
Yes, of course. There is many possibilities to explain about the etymological process. So the process of formation of the word koto etymologically. So there is not the only definitive explanation. But as far as I know, the explanation that I introduced to you is very, so to speak, popular.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
at least among the linguists of Japanese, ancient Japanese. So, if I take this explanation about the word koto or kata, and this suggests that we can koto in the sense of something which is expressed in some words. So we can koto in this sense. We can so to speak, link or relate and koto in this sense to happenings or events. So it's not a sheer thing without context, without any relationship to other things. But because koto or things that are expressed in languages or words are already interpreted within a certain context. It is similar, in my opinion, to some event or some thing happened in a certain context. And in this sense, I hope, I'm not sure, but I hope that we can, so with Nishitani, of course, we can relate emptiness, the notion of emptiness to koto in this sense. But this is just my opinion. Thank you so much.
Thank you. What is the word? Professor Marra? Okay. Professor Marra, please.
Marra sensei.
Discussion.
Professor Marra.
Hello. Yes, thank you very much. Very interesting discussion. I like how you contrast this essay, Ku to Soku, with the previous work, Religion and Nothingness.
Thank you so
That's
much.
very enlightening. My question and comment hooks on to Heisig's comment at the beginning, where he where he mentioned your statement toward the end of your paper,
Yes.
that sensation is primary.
Yes.
So here I have a problem of translation also.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if we want to use the word sensation in your statement.
Mm-hmm.
The reason is that you contrast what Nishitani is doing in this essay
Yes.
to the field of sensation
Mm-hmm.
in Religion and Nothingness. Now,
Yes.
I don't remember exact terms in Religion and Nothingness, but isn't the word for sensation kankaku? And if so, that would seem to contrast sharply with the word, with the expression that Nishitani uses in this essay, the joy teki
Mm-hmm.
ku. So there is a relation, I suppose, that the word sensation in most Western philosophy strongly suggests a subject-object relationship. And that's one reason why Nishitani criticizes that standpoint, that field.
Mm-hmm.
A standpoint of objectification, where we think of subjects, conscious subjects, having senses which are activated by objects outside of them, producing sensations. That's the usual connotation in most Western philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be what Nishitani is criticizing in Religion and Nothingness, or saying that has to be surpassed. The field of sensation has to be surpassed to the field of emptiness. So now, in this essay, Ku to Soku, do we really want to say that sensation becomes primary? Or do we rather want to say that joy becomes primary? Joy is translated as sensory or emotive or emotional. We could perhaps say also emotive. That has to do with, as you point out, with the heart, with communication via the heart, something not simply emotional, but we could say perhaps connective. It no longer presupposes a subject-object relationship, but rather what becomes primary is connection that the heart has with other hearts, with other beings, with other phenomena. And so then, if that's the case, we might say, or would you agree that we should say that joy becomes primary? And how to translate then this? We have sensory, we have emotional. For me, it also relates to the Buddhist conception of sentience, as in the word sentient beings, which is used a lot to describe Buddhist philosophy. Beings which, through their consciousness, for lack of a better word, are open to the world. Not only human beings, but any sentient being, and perhaps also non-sentient beings. But in any case, I'm hesitant to agree that sensation becomes primary. It seems to me that what we're talking about here is something more connective, something indicated more directly by the word joy teki. So unless I have misunderstood what you mean by sensation.
Thank you so much for your very important question. Yes, very frankly speaking, when I prepared for my presentation text of today, I tried to connect the text ku to soku, so emptiness and sameness, with Nishitani's Otani lectures, which the lectures which the late Nishitani presented or gave at the in his last days when he wrote this text, so ku to soku. So in this sense, I could say that Otani lectures were, so to speak, contemporary works with ku to soku. This is the assumption, or this is my the starting point of my presentation. And if I take this assumption as a starting point of my answer or my reply to your question, and in Otani lectures, there are many rich so to speak, phenomenological description about sensation and about experience, in particular, what Nishitani calls, Nishida called pure experience, but as Nishitani interprets it. And in these discussions about sensation or sensational experience or pure experience, Nishitani very frequently refers to ji or koto. And with this in mind, I would like to relate sensation to koto or things. And with this in mind, when I try to interpret the text ku to soku, in this text, I find Nishitani's interpretation of kousou-ryoku, so imagination, in relation to sensation or reason. And in this context, where Nishitani analyzes the relationship, imagination, sensation, and reason, I would like to propose that for the late Nishitani, the relationship between sensation or imagination and things and things which we experience in our everyday life. And this relationship is very important. So for the late Nishitani, the relationships, sensation, and things is worthwhile analyzing philosophically. This is the background of my presentation. And let me go to your question. So it's a question whether sensation is primary or whether joy, so emotion, is rather primary. This is a very crucial question. Yes, I agree with you that emotion and sensation, these two are different things. So of course, there can overlap, but at the same time, sensation is sensation and emotion is emotion. In this point, I fully agree with you, of course. But on the other hand, as I said before, according to my interpretation, in ku to soku, Nishitani tries to clarify, especially the role of imagination in our experience, or in, for example, in creating points, for example, with in relation to feeling, emotion, and reason. And in this sense, I believe that what is important for Nishitani when he writes Kutosoku is the relationship. So how these faculties of cognition, so imagination, sensation, emotion, and so on, are related. Of course, especially with special attention to the role of imagination, as I said before. And so I think that the point is, so what is the most important is the relationship, the very relationship between them. And so, of course, the main theme of Kutosoku is, as I said before, emptiness, so emotional emptiness. But at the same time, if I'm not mistaken, there are several themes. So not the soul theme, the only, so there is not one and all theme, main theme, but also in this text we can find several themes in Kutosoku. And one of these themes is emotion. So one of these themes of Kutosoku is, if I'm not mistaken, sensation. So in relation to koto or ji. Along with or besides emotion. And so to summarize, as stated previously, I would like to say or insist that in Kutosoku, sensation is sensation should be regarded as primary according to Nishitani, but this doesn't mean that emotion is secondary. I don't mean this, but I would like to say that of course emotion is also as important as sensation. Thank you so much.
May I sneak in a very quick, Enrico?
Yes.
Just a very quick pickup on the discussion of etymology.
Yeah.
Because I'm sorry for the ones waiting. Just very quickly, the discussion of the etymology of koto is kata. There is one passage at the end of the essay where Nishitani mentions kata in relation to what he calls faith, shin. And he says there is, to the act of faith, there's kata. And it's very interesting that his act of faith, of course, is connected to Jiji Muge, so the discussion of Ji. So how do you see that passage? It's on page 149.
May I?
Yes, 149 that it starts. If you have any follow-up, anything to add to your previous etymological comments.
Thank you so much. But yes, there is a passage in Kutosoku where Nishitani refers to kata. You are right, but I personally think that kata in this context, the word kata in this context is different from the word kata I previously referred to. So I think that the word kata in the text, this is not a word of the ancient Japanese, but this is a word of modern Japanese. Whereas the word kata that I previously mentioned, this is a word of ancient Japanese, and which has now in modern Japanese has different pronunciation, koto. So I don't think that we can connect the word kata in this context with koto or ji.
Yeah, this was my question.
Although of course these two words have the same pronunciation. kata.
Okay,
Thank you.
yes. Thank you.
There is it's waiting to their question. I think the right order is Anna Sarita Pisita.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
I think there's no so much time, but Kim Sensei had raised his hand before me. So I don't know if Kim Sensei.
Go on, please go on.
早かったですか、キム先生の。どうぞ。
Yeah, please go on, please.
いいですか? Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I try to be short. I'm very interested in, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you so much.
And I, especially in a term that is egoteki kankei, you use it, egoteki sonyu, that it used by Nishitani to translate this word, and the translation by Van Bracht Sensei was a word that I used in an article that I wrote 1 week ago, and so I'm very surprised because the article will be published I think next month, but I finished it 1 week ago, and I use it in the title, the circumcision, interpretation. But I found in my research, I tried to explain this word with the koan, goi, tozan goi. There is a koan that a Hakuin and his disciple introduced it in the koan system, and in a wonderful book that is wrote by Hans Wandelfeld Sensei and Absolute Nothingness, there is an explanation of this word and why Nishitani used this kind of translation. There is a translation did by Van Bracht Sensei, and it because Nishitani wanted to explain the relationship between Sho and Hen. There are the two elements of the Tozan Goi, the 5 ranks or grades of Tozan, Tang, Zen Master, Chan Master. And so it's so interesting, this translation, and I use it in my title because I thought that Van Bracht Sensei did this translation, and it's amazing because he used a concept of the Trinity of Christianity.
Yes.
So theology, used a theological words and terms, and for me it was an amazing choosing this way. And so I want to ask you if you think that this word is
Yes.
this translation is a good translation, so to translate Zen terms or Japanese philosophical terms with theological terms, is a good choice, or you have other ideas? Thank you. I don't know if you understand, because but it's incredible because I wrote this article, and in my title there is circumcision of universal and phenomenon. So and within the self. So it's very interesting, the similar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your very important question. To my translation of ego or ego as second inception. I chose the word circumcision as the translation of ego, because as far as I understand, the word circumcision refers to the relationship between God, Father, God, Son, so Jesus Christ, and Holy Ghost. which are, of course, three personas, but at the same time, one. So three and one. In other words, this is a relationship of Trinity. And the point is that these three personas are so to speak, different from each other, but indistinguishable, inseparable, while remaining different, or so to speak, indiscernible, distinguishable. And for me, to me, this relationship which contains distinction and so to speak, interdependence, or so to speak, the character of one, so to speak. This is very suitable for what Nishitani means by the word, the then word, we-go or ego. So, of course, the context is different, but when we consider what matters, so to speak, phenomenologically, this translation is very good.
Okay.
In my eyes.
Yes.
I would add something to that. When he chose that word, his idea wasn't to apply the doctrine of the Trinity. It was to use a word that had been invented to translate the Greek concept of perichoresis, that is going around together.
Yes.
And A means going around, and go means together.
Yes.
So it's a perfect translation, even if it hadn't been. It's a coincidence that it belongs to the Trinity, but Trinitarian doctrine has nothing to do, I don't think, with Rock's original intention.
Yes, that's true, because I link it also with the circle, with the concept of the circle, because the tozangoi are also written like a circle. So I explained the concept of the mirror for Hakuin, the four wisdoms, and tozangoi, and this word. So I did this. It was so difficult for me, and I was so surprised. I wrote in Italian, so if you can read it next month, I don't know when the publisher will publish it, I will be very happy. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Very interesting. Sorry for the time. Kim Sensei.
どうもどうも。
じゃあ、金先生、どうぞ。
いいですか？ありがとうございます。Thank you very much, Professor Abe, for your presentation.
Thank you so much.
And my question is, maybe very simple. Is there any meaning of the word, the lyric, the Jojo, in Nishitani's philosophy or Nishitani's expression? Even the Jojo, the concept of Jojo, the lyric or the lyrical. So as long as I understand, the emptiness and sameness is in that article, Nishitani want to express this emptiness. He does not want to describe or to analyze, but how we can express, and through this expression, how can we communicate each other, or how this emptiness is located in our emotion or sensation as the fundamental, the structure of understanding of our understanding. But as long as I understand, and also the Bartneck, in his preface of the translator to the religion of nothingness, Bartneck said the regional nothingness is full of lyrical expression, he said. So I think before Nishitani wrote this emptiness, sameness, his idea or his way of understanding this emptiness was, if I use the Bartneck terminology, was lyrical already. So my question is very simple. That for Nishitani, the concept of the lyric or the world of lyric, it has any special meaning, or did he use this JoJo in his other works or the other articles? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And your question is very inspiring for me, because I have never thought about the importance of the notion of lyric. So Nishitani's Kutosoku. This is a new insight for me. So because of this, it is difficult for me to quickly respond to your question.
Because I think the joy or the sensation, that all is always seen in this concept of the lyric.
Yes.
This emotional expression of our feeling using the or interesting these things, right? For example, in the using the sky, we can express our condition of being, condition of our being. So I think this lyric must have some meaning, the place in Nishitani's system of thinking. So that is my seeds of my imagination. So if you are the expertise of this Nishitani philosophy, so I want to ask you to teach me whether this concept of lyric can be located, or Nishitani also has some idea of what the lyric is when he describes the emptiness or this so on. So that's my question.
Yes. So let me give some time. So I cannot quickly answer to you, because your question is very important, too important to quickly give my offhand answer.
No. So I really ask you to teach me and give me insight on that concept. So please, thank you for your
so much
presentation.
Then yes, if you want, and then we have two questions. One from Lorenzo Marinucci, and probably the final question from Professor Hashi. So Lorenzo, if you want to.
Thank you. It was a really great presentation. Two really quick things. So as you were connecting Koto and Qatar, so it came to my mind the really famous passage in Heidegger's conversation with Athens, which is
yes.
in the Koto ba. So like there would be the same line.
Yes.
And also then a word like Makoto. Like a fully expressed. So
yes.
It's like a kind of truth that is not just a logical truth, but like when we really find the right word to say something.
Yes.
And then it's true in a poetic sense.
Yes.
But then like if this sense of like a fact is something we are able to say, that's really interesting for me, because in a way language, something that already so sore, like we probably knew nothing about shunyata, but really we express, okay, so it's a network of differential relationships. When I'm saying dog, when I have a word for the fact of a dog, I mean, I'm implying, I'm already talking about my connection to the dog and the way the dog is connected and contrasted. But let's say with chicken, my yard. So I need to have a notion of an animal next to me, and it needs to be distinguished enough from other animals in order for me to name it. So like this naming is about perception, but also naming has this kind of inherent like relationship to emptiness. But then on the other section, I mean, as Professor Maraldo started questioning like what's the relationship with the sensation and emotion. like a formulation that comes to me. I mean, I agree with your take. And I would say that like imagination is able to deepen sensation. So like again, a linguistic example would be a metaphor. So if the sky can become the metaphor, my feeling of emptiness, like everything can become the metaphor for everything else. And that's like how, like linguistically, the movie realizes itself. So in like how if I see I don't know, a willow tree in the rain, it's just a willow. So that would be the standpoint of sensation in like Kyoto Wananka. But then if I see the willow as loneliness, like a lonely willow in the tree, like it would be in a haiku. And I'm not just projecting something on the willow. I really like that physical sensation is getting wider, expanded, and transparent in the sense. So it's like when he's talking about transparency, it seems to be about like how things can be metaphors for everything else, and how that's the in the sense like muge, this linguistic level of muge means that everything is related linguistically to everything else in order to be expressible as koto.
Yes.
But also can express everything else on an emotional level. So like, again, the notion of lyricism.
Yes.
I was wondering if metaphors are a way of understanding muge as an emotional and linguistic reality.
Thank you so much. Yes, this is very interesting. Yes, I can agree with you on that. In the point that maybe Nishitani himself thinks highly of the role of metaphors. So in the sense of your explanation in detail, when he talks about when he discusses ku or sora in the context of for example Basho's Renku or Saigyo's poems and so on. So in the first section of the text, ku to soku, in particularly, but on the other hand, despite my full agreement with you, I would like to say that in the section, I don't know which section precisely, but anyway, in the section where the word of Jiji Muge features, so is the main topic. In this section, Nishitani stresses emphasizes that in this word, in the word of Jiji Muge, languages don't take take a great role, a pivotal role anymore, but instead, for example, silence is so primary, or science is silence, silencio, is dominant. So silence is at least as important as languages or speaking acts. And so if I understand languages in broad sense, namely languages including silence as well, maybe we can say that in the world of Jiji Muge, there is a sort a kind of languages, or there is also a kind of metaphors, so which would be applicable for describing the word of Jijimuge as well. But now I have no idea of what kind of metaphors which could be useful or applicable to do this. So this is my further tasks so I would like to further more precisely consider this topic.
It's a beautiful part.
Thank you so much.
And final question, Professor Hashi. Professor Hashi, if you want to put your question.
So, can I have still time? I'm
Yes.
very happy. I'm very happy to have still time. And discussion is quite interesting and vivid and stimulating. And some parts of my comments were already mentioned or solved, and so that I can let some parts of my comments unremained. Still, in one point, I would like to point out something regarding the question, quite interesting and important question of Marardo-san. If sensation is primary or joy emotion is more important or primary. And something were already spoken or discussed. Still, the point I would like to point out the original meaning of the Japanese word kankaku and joy. And joy, kankaku is composed by two letters, kan and kaku. And kan can be translated with sensation, correctly, I think. But kaku means also the self-consciousness or something which is intellectual. And Nishitani has written quite detailed interpretation to Aristotle's theory. And an important point of his interpretation to Aristotle is that sensation, namely aesthesis, contains already potentially the intellectual element of knowledge or knowing. And just this meaning, potential meaning, is contained also in the Japanese word kankaku, especially in the part kaku. And kaku is also means also jikaku and has deep meanings. So the translation of sensation, translation of kankaku with sensation is still correct, but still a little too short. Second, joy. Joy can be translated correctly with emotion, but again, the second letter, E,
Yes.
means also will.
Volition.
Will, that is also an essential element of the subjectivity in the sense of Nishitani. Subject or subjectivity as one part of the pair of subject and object is negated, but Nishitani uses also should I say. Should I say is can be or the must be or the could be translated again with subjectivity, but whereby the so far as I understand, the Greek word hypokemenon is also contained. Hypokemenon is neither subject nor object, but the self of a subject. And jo e is will, and also not only the emotion. So the alternative sensation or emotion in regards to the question, which is more primary, could be considered a little further. I would like to say that sensation, in the sense of Nishitani, kankaku, could also be understood with the following example, which Nishitani gives, namely, when chikade, is that correct English word? Chikade, semi.
Cicada.
Cicada.
Cicada, yes.
Cicada. When
Yes.
cicada sings and we listen to the cicada, then our sensation or our sensation of hearing or listening is in one with the fact that cicada sings. So kankaku is at first also primary, as Abe-san has always explained. I agree with him. And at the same time, in this fact that we are hearing to semi, and we feel that the life of cicada is quite short, and in the song of cicada, some feeling of nihilum or nihility is also contained in this sentence. So kankaku and joy is continuous, what is also expressed by Abe-san. So I only wanted to point out the two points, two meanings, kaku in kankaku and I in joy. And in the translation, no translation suffers for translating these meanings. And the translation is eternal problem of us, for us, in understanding the text in another language. For example, nihi kyomu, in German translation of religion and nothingness, kyomu is translated with nihilismus. That is no more correct, not only incorrect, but also misunderstanding and misleading. And such problems are always contained. And one example was just, the question of Marardo Sensei was quite essential and interesting. But I wanted to say is that there are still, as always, still some points which we could take in consideration. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And may I respond to Ohai Sensei?
Yes.
Yes. So how many times?
As you want. Till 1 o'clock, so we have still 2 hours and for one presentation. So
okay, thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much. ありがとうございます。For your very inspiring comment or explanation in detail. Yes, I fully agree with you regarding rich meanings of the two words, kankaku and joy. And let me briefly comment on your comment. maybe I could refer to the article titled 過去について the article that I have mentioned in my humble presentation as well. In this article as well, Nishitani tries to show that even in the most primordial sensation, even in this very, so to speak, primitive level of our cognitive activities, there is some kind of element of so reason or intellectual activities. And as far as I understand, this is the point of this essay, 過去について. And in this sense, I could compare this article, this very, very short article of the late Nishitani, to his Aristotle interpretation, as you mentioned. And if I may, I would like to give my humble comments on your explanation about the second word, 上位, and in particular, the second character, a Chinese character, 意 of the word. Yes, and you are completely right in the point that the second Chinese character 意 implies not only will or volition, but also some connections with should I say subjectivity in the sense of Nishitani. And I would like to relate or connect this meaning, the meaning of should I say of the second character 意 of the word 上位 with if I may, the force of life as well. The life force that I mentioned at the very last part of my presentation. And of course, as should I say, subjectivity is a main feature of our human being, or the human being with the ability of self-consciousness. So should I say, so to be a shutai, to be a subject, we need to have some kind of knowledge about ourselves, a sort of self-consciousness or self-awareness and so on. But if I may dare to say, I would like to suggest that maybe we could, I'm not sure, but we could relate this this notion of should I say, or subjectivity further to the life force which is found, can be found not only in human beings, but also non-human beings. Or other living things. Of course, as far as we know, there is no intellectual element in non-human beings or non-human beings. For example, animals don't have a faculty of self-consciousness, and as far as we know. But nevertheless, I would like to say that we can find E. This subjective element also in non-human beings like animals, in the sense that animals also, such non-human beings also have a life force in the sense of Nishitani. And there is a kind of continuity between the life force that is found in non-human beings and the subjectivity of human beings. Maybe we could expand the meaning of E in this direction. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So it was a wonderful presentation, a wonderful discussion. I think you can take 5 minutes pause, drink a cup of coffee, and then start with it. Start at 11.
This Michele Marra, who translated this essay,
Yes, sure.
is an expert in aesthetics.
Yes. I personally
Mhm. I can have still time. We can have still time. Oh, I'm happy. We can have some time. Some parts of my comments were already mentioned or solved, so that Mm.
In the church, but we just have one topic. Sorry, people join via Zoom, but the atmosphere is very enthusiastic and we continue. Yes, informally, but we have to move to the next presentation, to the second presentation of this morning. It's Professor Stephen Lofts' turn. So
I'll try to be quick and short. You don't really. Well, I was told I had a bit more time, so I added some things, and seemed to we enjoyed the first one so much. We're a little behind that. So I'll try to read the text reasonably quickly. Right off the bat, I'll apologize for any of the Japanese, and it's a text that has to be really read. And I'll just, no further ado. My presentation today explores the play of difference in Nishitani's text between the phonetic sound utsusu, written in hiragana on the one hand, and a series of ideograms possessing the same phonetic pronunciation on the other. At the same time, it pushes the translation of specific terms beyond how they would normally be translated to bring out a hidden dynamic that I believe is at work in Nishitani's thought. Because my pronunciation of these Japanese words will undoubtedly be incorrect, because I will not read all of the Japanese, it is important to read along with my text. My paper focuses on Nakai's and Nishitani's use of the expression utsutsu, and argues that for Nakai and Nishitani, utsutsu forms the logic of seeing and the aesthetic presencing of a dynamic image of the transient world. As such, it can never be rendered present because it is the mechanism of immediate aesthetic presencing. Strictly speaking, utsutsu is not a word or a concept, but the source of words and concepts. Thus, it cannot be translated into any language, the act of translation itself being another form of utsutsu. Thus, utsutsu has a mobile meaning that can only ever be signified by other terms that differentiate it and displace it, such as to transfer, to change, to copy, to transcribe, to duplicate it, to photograph, to reflect, or to project. What is more, utsutsu can never be seen because it is the movement of immediate seeing itself. And thus, it is manifested in the appearance of the transient present world that results from the utsutsu. In short, it is the mediated immediacy of the soku that forms a bidirectional reflecting, transferring, and mirroring of binary opposites, the movement from the invisible to the visible, from the visible to the invisible, that forms the event of presencing. While the term utsutsu operates at the heart of Nishitani's later thought, he never seems to define it. Utsutsu, however, plays a central role in Nakai's theory of seeing and his understanding of the originary form of art. Thus, my presentation today draws from Nakai's work in the early 30s to help unpack the meaning of utsutsu as it operates in Nishitani's later work. Despite its appearance, however, my paper does not argue for influence. Those familiar with Derrida will no doubt hear echoes of Derrida in my presentation of utsutsu. Whereas with Derrida's différance, utsutsu operates between what can be read but not heard, heard but not read, a difference that produces the difference and movement between the phonetic sounds of hiragana and the meaning of the kanji, between the embodied encounter of speech and the general meaning of words. And as with difference, utsutsu postpones and differentiates our experience of phenomena. The experience of the present world is an appearing by which the visible is the utsutsu of the invisible, and the invisible is the utsutsu of the visible. From what I can see, Nishitani's technical use of utsutsu only appears in his later works. As for Nishida, while mirroring and reflection are constant metaphors in his thought from the beginning, the only technical use of utsutsu in hiragana that I could find was in a 1935 lecture, and there it only appeared once and without discussion. In Religion and Nothingness, the term utsutsu is employed only in the last two chapters, which contain, it could be argued, Nishitani's most original work. What is more, the expression utsutsu, utsutsu itself is only found in kuto soku, where it functions as a type of cut word that is echoed throughout the essay, providing it with its internal structure. It appears on pages 123, 133, and 160, where Nishitani states that the common ground of the arts is the ability to raise the sensible image to the heights of the text, while weaving the realm of linguistic texture by way of the utsutsu, utsutsu, utsutsu. We can say that deep in the poetic work of art is found the essential phenomena of utsutsu. For Nishitani, this weaving of the texture by the poets provides things with their look and a people with their outlook, myth. It is the poetic wellspring from which, quote, every culture has arisen, end quote. For Nishitani, language creates the reality of the present world, whereas art provides this reality with its visibility. To speak with Kassir, the visibility of nature is the actual, even the only goal of artistic activity. Things gain their look, the Geschichte, through the poet's vision that weaves the cloak of reality, that forms the texture of reality. As an aside, as you all know, the Japanese term bunka is comprised of two characters, bun, which in the modern Japanese can mean sentence or literature, and ka, which can signify to change to the action of making into something. Etymologically, bun can be traced back to the character mun from the Chinese wen for pattern and signified a beautiful intricate pattern, a tattooed or carved figure. In Yamato, bun originally reflected the straw rope patterns found on the prehistoric Japanese pottery. Like the straw rope patterns, the threads of culture weave a people's life into an intricate pattern, a texture of relations that is carved into the body. Hence the meaning of bunka as the making into the relational patterns that forms the historical body. The weaving of the threads into the texture of life that functions as the background or context of the visible appearance of the present world. But let's return to Nishitani. In the English translation of Religion and Nothingness, we do find the expression, quote, projected, reflected, and transferred 4 times. But if we return to the original Japanese, we see that the expression utsu, utsu, utsu is not used by Nishitani here. The original Japanese instead reads, it is something that has been utsutsu into the field of reason, to give one example. Thus, the translators have added projected, reflected, and transferred, perhaps under the guidance of Nishitani himself, so that the text echoes the phrasing in kuto soku. The connection between utsu and soku is made clear in Shunata and Time by Nishitani. He writes, with respect to the koto of samsara, soku, nirvana, I have said that its meaning is apprehended existentially in such a way that the mind of the Tathagata is utsuru into the mind of man, and that the mind of man utsuru into the mind of Tathagata. I also spoke of the ko utsuru as the realization of the reality of the soku. Soku is thus a bidirectional utsutsu that forms the mediated immediacy of the special transmission from heart to heart that takes place beyond words and letters. Speaking of the unique attitude of Zen in the transmission from the heart to heart beyond words and letters, that should be Nishitani, sorry. Nishitani evokes the well-known metaphor. It is often said water is of one vessel is utsutsu into another vessel. From the very beginning of Kuto Soku, Nishitani makes it clear not only that the issue he is addressing is found at the crossroads of the aesthetic imagination and language, but that he is dealing at once with the poetic image and the nature of language. It is also clear that his approach is to descend through the concepts to language, and then through language to the poetic image, and from there to the source of poetic images in immediate experience. It is this return to the Ursprung of language and image, an inquiry that never departs from experience, but penetrates the source of experience, namely the experience of the Buddhist mood of emptiness. Mood here and throughout this text should, I would contend, not be understood as a subjective private emotion, but in terms of the Heideggerian notion of Stimmung, that colors the world and discloses how things are going for us, which Nakai reminds us etymologically designated the equivalent projection of acoustic echoes or linguistic meaning. The Buddhist mood of emptiness is the pure experience of the fundamental Stimmung as a field of affectivity in which all sentient beings always already find themselves. The world of Stimmung, which we call mood, is a world of endless echoes, the endless echoing of life in all sentient beings that Nishitani calls in religion and nothingness a sheer being in the world in a straightforward sense, essentially more essential than the being in the world as human. This is what it is to live life in a true sense. This descent passes through several layers of language, I should say through several kinds of language, rational to poetic, and in fact, several languages back to the Ursprache of Japanese culture. On the first level, we encounter a series of European terms or Japanese translations of European terms. For example, build, image, imagination, magic, vision, etc. In many cases, these have been translated or simply not included as the translator assumed that they were redundant. On the next level, we find modern Japanese. Here, the translation levels down several important distinctions, such that the reader cannot distinguish when Nishitani employs, for example, the term kaizu for image, as in the example there, which I would have translated as form image. Image when written in kanakata, image as in zo, as in the image of God, and finally image in sugata, which has also been translated as form, for example, the form of the mountain village in winter. Sugata is of particular importance in this text as it expresses both a form and a flowing and fleeting image of a living atmosphere, and as such must be distinguished from katachi as the being there, chi, of the kata. In sugata, however, heart-mind becomes visible while at the same time retaining its invisibility. It is in and through the moving visible image, sugata, of the autumn leaves and the sound of the bell on the porch that the invisible wind becomes visible. Is it by chance that sugata is the ancient title for Buddha? Is the source of art immediately connected to the experience of sugata by the monks of the emptiness? Connecting art and religion. We might consider the legend of the origin of the Japanese shakashi. A monk heard the sound of the wind blowing through the bamboo. Realizing that the path was hidden in the sound, he cut the bamboo and blew the wind instrument with his mouth. The descent through language, however, is obscured by the translation. Let me illustrate with one example. The English translation reads, earlier I used the word image, but actually the empty sky said visible to the eye has no form. And in a strict sense, one cannot say it is a figure or an image. Rather, one should say that it is a visible image without form. A more precise translation might be, although I have used the word form image above, the visible sky is something without form. And in a strict sense of the word, it is not a form image or an image. Instead, it is something that is a visible phenomena of something without form. My point here is not that the translation is incorrect, but that the translation obscures the descent through language to what can be called an immediate visible phenomena of formlessness. That is to say, to the sugata of the winter wind as an image of the presencing of the sugata. That is to say, Buddha nature, that is to say, ku. We are brought back here now to the utsutsu. Nishitani's descent through modern Japanese to the Yamato language, the original Japanese language that provides the modern Japanese with its grammar and basic linguistic notions. Thus, the grammar of poetic language and the cut words of the particles are taken from Yamato. The original sense of the Yamato language, such as utsutsu, can be heard echoing through the ideograms of kanji of modern Japanese. Utsutsu, 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 utsutsu. Nishitani explicitly recognizes the importance of the indigenous Yamato culture for contemporary modern Japanese culture. He writes, the Yamato spirit is the living principle that simultaneously achieves the most open-minded inclusion in the most substantial unity of what is embraced. I believe that the deepest Japanese spirit is present in this simile. To penetrate more deeply into the latter Nishitani, we need to explore the Yamato language that operates in Kuto Soku. I've, of course, limited myself today to utsutsu, but there are many more. I give a list there. While I believe that Nishitani demonstrates the meaning of utsutsu in this text, he certainly does not define and explain it as far as I can see. As I said, however, utsutsu plays a central role in Nakai's theory of seeing and his understanding of the originating phenomena of art. And I'm drawing from his 1902 article, The Utsutsu, an anthropological study of art and the aesthetics of conversion. According to the kanji specialist Shirakawa, the original meaning of utsutsu suggested the appearance of some aspect of reality that momentarily surfaces from out of the shadows. Utsutsu is the transitive verb form of utsushi. It means to transfer in the sense of moving something from one place to another, as happens when something invisible is moved out of the shadows into the light of presence. And the transmission is in a direct transmission from the heart to the heart, and to transition from one moment to the next, as in the transition of history. As Nakai writes, as utsutsu, to transfer a mirror, indicates, the structure of projection, signifies an equivalent projection, such that transferring, reflecting, and reversing. When something is moved, transferred, from one place to another, and it has a relational significance, then people say that it has been utsushita. For Nakai and Nishitani, the essence of seeing is to be found in utsutsu. It is the bidirectionality of a communication that forms an equality and dialectical interactivity between the sender and the receiver. This bidirectionality and equality between diametrically opposing positions of a dichotomy form the core of Nakai's philosophy. Utsutsu itself, Nakai says, is not something that exists. What exists, what is present, is an A or a B, and they exist only in a dynamic relation to each other, in the endless movement from one to the other, reflecting and echoing each other. And in this reflecting and echoing, transform each other into what they collectively are. What can be present and given is only an A here or a B there, but not the cut that forms the interval or between that brings them together as the two poles of a single relational reality. Utsutsu can thus only ever be present in the movement of this transferring mirroring. What is more, Utsutsu leads to the idea of equality and equivalence, and thus to a bidirectional projection between A, a receiver, and B, the sender, between B, a receiver, and A, the sender. Utsutsu is neither simply active or passive, but both at once. As a middle voice, it moves in both directions, actively projecting and passively mirroring. As the movement from A to B and from B to A, from one cut to another, the movement of Utsutsu stands beyond the dichotomy of the plurality it mediates, between the metaphysical duality of a subject that acts and an object that is acted upon. The meaning of this shift between the two directions is, in essence, the meaning of montage. This convertibility in the direction from having been thrown to throwing is the secret of the mechanism of the poetic work of art. The bidirectionality of Utsutsu assumes the equivalence projections or movements between the receiver and the sender. Nakai writes, each of these meanings designates an equivalent projection between the model and the original existence that is copied, transferred, and reversed. It must be noted that within everything that is called form or style, there exists such a kata as well as the phenomena of Utsutsu as the mechanism of their construction. In the work of art, that is, in poiesis and techne of light, in the photograph, literally the light painting, the two directions of thrown and being thrown of the equivalent projections unfold in the two directions of Utsutsu through the cut space, the interval between that brings them into being as the two poles of a single relational reality of the visible world, as a lived presencing that is always to be in becoming and never to be. The in-between is technology. For example, the Japanese word moya means the space between objects. It is further developed to mean space in a house where people lived, for example, a tea room. It means a kind of separation, such as the transom. That is not a concept of space. It is not difficult to appreciate the affinity of Japanese thinkers for phenomenology, though the nature of the appearance is perhaps very different. Western philosophy has always, it seems, sought a non-mediated encounter with an eternal reality beyond the transitory and ephemeral. The visible appearance is always a representation of the real. However, as we have seen, the notion of appearance of the transient world expressed by the Yamato term Utsutsu is not a representation, but rather an expression of Utsutsu, and emerging from the shadow, a moment of transition from the invisible to the visible, from the visible to the invisible. The empty sky is a metaphorical link between the visible and the invisible, and it is a metaphor that cannot be reduced to a simple metaphor. A metaphor is a form of Utsutsu. As Keiji observes, the term metaphor comes from the Greek metapherein, which means to transfer or to change. Thus, metaphor is a genuine transference the two contents between which it goes back and forth have been fixed as a self-determined and independent signification, and between them as fixed beginnings and endpoints, as the given terminus ad quo and terminus ad quem, the movement of the representation that leads from the one to the other takes place, and the one, in accordance with the expression, is substituted for the other. Keisser distinguishes between mere metaphor and radical metaphor or phonetic metaphor that underpin language and is grounded in the immediate experience. Such radical or phonetic metaphors function as the basic framework and place in which and whereby all subsequent linguistic differentiation takes place. A phonetic metaphor would be an immediate sound that says nothing in itself, but the affectivity of its sensible sense is a contributing moment in language formation, opening and providing the world with its sensible texture. It forms, as it were, a natural interconnection between sensibility and sense, sound and signification. Thus, the real subject of art is to be sought in a certain fundamental structural elements of our sense experience itself in lines, designs, and architectural and musical forms. These elements are, so to speak, omnipresent. Free from all mystery, they are patent and unconcealed. They are visible, audible, and tangible. In this sense, Buddha did not hesitate to say that art does not pretend to show the metaphysical depths of reality. It merely sticks to the surface of natural phenomena. The artist is absorbed in the pure forms of things. He intuits their immediate presence. The ur phenomena just appear. To see in them anything but surface is to introduce a metaphysical depth that is foreign to them. Thus, there is an activity of sensibility itself that, to speak with Buddha, there is also an exact sensible imagination. We stand here before the genesis of the articulated sound, the dynamic process of the development of a structured sound. In the fact that, to speak with Buddha, the clang rounds itself into a tone. In all languages, Keisser observes, there are to be found, for example, adverbs that describe only one activity, one state, one characteristic, and constantly only belong to and can only be associated with one verb. The position and location of the objects that are spoken about are designated by the different phonetic coloring by means of different vowels, or in certain circumstances by a different tone. From all this, it clearly emerges how, from the stage of linguistic formation, sounds immediately coalesce with the elements of sensuous intuition while simultaneously penetrating into it and attempting to exhaust it in its complete correlation and fullness. It is already a further step towards freeing the proper and originary form of language from the content of sensuous intuition when, in place of the immediate, intuitive, omnipathetic, or mimetic expression, there emerges another way of designating, which we can call analytical. Thus, the sensible sound initially did not represent anything. It was a concrete emotive expression. Thus, for example, the simple change of tone can be used as the expression of negation, or it can stamp two essentially identical syllables with different tonal qualities to express things or events, nouns or verbs. Such radical phonetic metaphors form the mother tongue of those who speak them. For here, too, sound never portrays the individual, the particular, and the accidental of the sensible impression. Rather, it oscillates purely within itself, and only as a totality of that which is not directed towards something other and external. Rather, the pure mutual tone oscillations enclose within themselves the unity of an aesthetic mood. Thus, the apparent return to the immediacy is more the result of a double mediation in which linguistics and poetic form take part, each in its own particular way. What is the meaning of the sound ah? In Yamamoto, I am told that it expressed the experience of something bright or fresh. Ah, can we not still hear the echo of this sensible encounter with the bright and fresh in such words as aru, yes, aka, and Kasir's point is that the difference between a simple metaphor and a radical metaphor is that the simple metaphor links between a simple metaphor and a radical metaphor is that a simple metaphor links otherwise independent existences and thus operates on a level of everyday prose, whereas the radical metaphor is the source of such independent existence that operates at the level of poetic expression. At the level of prose, language is structured by the copula that joins elements, rendering the textual context into a coherent continuity. The poetic is structured not by the judgment of a copula, SSP, but by the cut words, which render the textual context into a discontinuous continuity of dynamic images. The cut space is the distance or space, as well as the interval of time between one distinct element moment and another distinct element or moment in the poetic expression. At the heart of Utsutsu lies the problem of continuity and discontinuity. It is continuous in the sense that it has an equivocal relation, but discontinuous in the sense that it is separate into two places. Seeing itself must be a continuity of discontinuity. Nakai would seem to root this idea of continuity of discontinuity of the Utsutsu in Kasir and Cohen in the dynamic meaning of the continuous disconnection that operates in the symbolic function. The symbolic function functions as the medium for the mechanical continuity, mechanical continuity. That is this connection of space and time as a equivalent relation of time. In the poetic work, image words are cut and spliced together so that each image word is given a distinct place and momentary presence in the flowing series of the image words. One schematic space is separated and differentiated from another through the cut. The creative power of the montage for Nakai stems from the movement from one distinct image to another distinct image, forming a flow of connection without connection, a connection without copula. That is to say, a movement without the logical schematic judgment that connects differentiated schematic spaces into a logical, coherent continuity, sublating them into the whole of the narrative. Thank you. I apologize for all the pronunciation stuff, but reading the text is not my forte. There's personal reasons for that. My brain can't function that way, and I don't hear sounds at all. That's why I have 2 hearing aids. So I actually can't reproduce sound. I can't hear it. I can't reproduce it. And so when I get into a text like this, where everything is based on the distinction between sounds and groups, and I'm moving from one language to another language, it's just not my. I envy all of you who can do this kind of stuff. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you to you, and start with question or discussions. There are two. So
Please.
Tobias and then Alessandro. Okay. And then okay. So Tobias, Alessandro, Alessandro, and Professor Heising. Okay, Tobias.
Direct first impression, so it might be a bit disordered in my head still, but in relation to the text of Nishitani, it's the reference Kuto. Just going with, again, the translations of Marra, and speaking of these two realms of experience, unhindered reason and unhindered things. I got the impression that you were focusing mostly in your discussion of art, poetry specifically, Bun, on what Nishitani discusses as the domain of unhindered reason, where the poet and the artistic expression works, and I think very much so in the way you described with not relying on Nakai. But reading Nishitani's text, there seems to be this moment of transgressing art towards what he calls the religious domain. And I would wonder how this discussion of Utsutsu is at play or at work in that transgression or in that space or in this different dimension of what Nishitani addresses as unhindered things. I will keep it at that, yes.
Thanks. That's a big question and one that I would have continued to deal with, except that I would have needed twice as much long pages. And the way I would approach that is to bring the Utsutsu into how it constructs myth. So once it's created, the structure of myth, once I have the structure of myth in Kasir, in myth, in Kasir, the word and image function simultaneously with myth. So language, art, and myth are born at once. And life in myth is a life within that sensibility structure. So that the word and image do not represent the god or the mana, but are the very presence of the mana itself. Then, but if that were just like that, then you wouldn't be able to move. And so what Kasir says is that, in fact, myth is always magical myth. It's distinguished from religion myth. And so the mythical magical for Kasir is an abstraction that says this is what pure myth would be, but there is no such thing as pure myth. Myth is the mythical magical. The mythical is always in opposition to the religious movement. And then I would go to the idea of what religion does is it takes the texture of the real and turns it into a text of the real. Texture. So the texture of the real turns into a texture of the real. It sees the real not as the real, but as a texture of the real. And that's what keeps the dynamics going. And so the Utsutsu always comes back onto itself and then closes. So it opens up and then closes back.
If I may reply, so it seems to me that this kind of flips the distinction that Nishitani makes in his text, though, in the sense that when you speak of the texture that is made out of the real, this seems to be more connected to art in contradistinction to the religious, in the sense that I think this is at least my reading of Nishitani's text. The religious is precisely the immediate contact with the real, with not the text, but the texture. Sorry, and art is what kind of secondarily makes the pattern, makes the texture, writes the writing. But that might be just semantics.
It's part of semantics, and it's also the whole idea of the absurdity that is spoken about here. I believe because it's absurd. There is an absurdity to the religious movement because it must. It doesn't see the golden calf as an idol, right? It sees it as the real. and then turns it into an idol and then to an icon. And so this requires that type of movement from experiencing the real to know it's an idol and then turning it into an icon that turns back into the real. So religion can't get out of it. It has to constantly come back. And it's the history of religion for Kashir is intimately connected with the history of art. You cannot separate the two. And at the moment you do separate them, this is when you're abstractly talking about these symbolic forms in their purity, right? Here's the pure, here's the magical, mythical, here's art. But in reality, they're always interconnected in a dynamic of attention.
But that might be an interesting thread to follow in the sense of how precisely these two Kegon dimensions in Nishitani of unhindered reason and unhindered things also remain in attention. It's not just about leaving one for the other. And I think he does mention that religious people as a hobby then do poetry and start writing or start doing art, just as sometimes artists are also religious halfway. So there is this tension going on. One last thing, just very, very shortly, the very last part where you go into the copula. If you could just, could you put up the, no, maybe not. But you speak about, you spoke about, how to say, an apprehension of things that is not subject to predicate judgment. So in a sense, before it can be put into the order of predicate judgment without copula. And I'm not sure exactly how you phrased it, but it reminded me of a phrase that I encountered in Giorgio Agamben in a recent work of his, where he develops the concept of non-relationality. And he goes into a direction where he uses this word connection in the sense of this connectivity that is dependent upon the various relations that depend on an idea of precisely a kind of judgment based on predication on the logic of being as copula. And he speaks of very poignantly, so a kind of point of contact without connection. Contact without connection. And I think what you hinted at the end, it might fit that what you're aiming for there, that things, they come into contact, maybe through this kind of movement or dynamics of utsusu, utsuru, but without thereby being connected in the sense of having this, how to say, structured, how should I phrase it?
Your idea.
I have no idea. Okay. Maybe I should just stop and make a cut. But just at least this phrase was kind of stuck in my mind when you read your last sentence, contact without connection. Maybe this is the kind of, this might be a helpful tool to relate to this discussion. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
I'm not a Agamben specialist. I found it interesting. I think you must have been there. Scholars are now showing that Agamben was heavily influenced by reading of Buddhism.
Yeah, specifically Nagarjuna.
Yeah.
The most decisive reading, but okay.
May I? Yes. Thank you so much, Professor Loft, for this very, very inspiring and very rich presentation. And I have one comment and one question. And let me begin by my comment. with regard to the words that you mentioned in the presentation, such as utsusu or utsutsu or utsushiyo. Maybe, so in my view, maybe you could introduce other words or incorporate these words into your discussion in order that you could enrich your discussion. And these words are utsurou, utsurou, or utsuroi, utsurou, utsuroi. And these words could be translated into English as transition or alteration, but in the temporal sense, not in the spatial sense. And of course, at the last of your presentation, in the context of your interpretation of Kasira, maybe, if I correctly remember, you mentioned this temporal meaning of utsusu, but maybe you could emphasize this very temporal moment of these words that are related to utsu. So, for example, when we speak utsushiyo, so this word, word where we live. So this word utsushiyo strongly imply the transitive or so changeable from moment to moment. This very temporal meaning. So in this sense, if I may, I could propose so that you could strengthen your discussion in this direction. So in terms of the temporal connotation of these words that are related to utsu. This is my comment.
Can I comment on the comment?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay. There is just one thing
Can
I got a comment to my comment and then.
Yes. Just
Next to that, the layer, especially the word like utusemi.
Yes.
It's a Haskell cicada, which is the preemptive Haskell cicada, because of course has been left, but the cicada has moved away.
It's the dead skin. Yeah, I had to take the dead. Yeah, and I had to take all that out because I was trying to my comment was, you see, I oscillate between the visible world and the transient world. And I do have in there the idea that it is a transmission or a transmission, a direct transmission from the heart to heart is a transition. I add that it is the transition from one moment to the next. And later in the text, you'll see that I used element moment. It's because I'm using the German word Hegelian idea of the moment, which is both an element of a structure, spatial, and a moment in time.
Okay.
And so I built into my presentation time, and I took out the cicada's pore skin shell because I just lack of more complicated. Already it's just getting too many words for me. So yes, I totally agree on the transient and temporal structure of it.
Thank you so much.
Another question.
Yes, but may I? So please allow me to give a very short question, which is very similar to Tobias' question. And I would like to ask you if any idea how to if any idea you have how to apply your ideas and concerning utsu, in your presentation to, so to speak, religious or ritual texts or spells, and that are distinguished from literary or poetic works. For example, there is in Shintoism in Japan, there is Norito, which the Shintoistic priest, so to speak, sings in front of Shintoistic deities, Kashikomi, Mosu, like this. And I think there are some corresponding ritual texts in different religions, including Christianity or Quran, Judaism, and so on. And as far as I know, the Italian philosopher, I don't remember his first name, but if I correctly remember, Giuliani, who was very strongly inspired by Heidegger and Gadamer, and he concentrated himself on a very, very interesting interpretation of ritual texts in the context of Christianity, because he was a priest. And so, do you have any idea to apply your ideas concerning utsu also to such ritual texts, which is not which are not so poetic text?
The narrative part of a mythical structure.
Yes.
Because here is only the surface of myth. The real myth lies in its ritual, material, embodied actions.
Mm-hmm.
So people say, well, ritual, what is a ritual? Mm-hmm. Ritual is a mode of seeing that has been articulated in a body movement. Mm-hmm. And so you don't, what we do is just too intellectual sometimes, and we lose how a movement can then change how you see the world. The simple, itadakimasu at every meal. And most people maybe don't even remember what they're thinking about. They don't understand what they're doing. But it's a ritual that constantly brings you back. And I think all different types of rituals have this embodied framework that incorporate and create a way of seeing. Mm. And so you do the action, you do the ritual. You don't have to cognitively understand it. In fact, the less you understand it, the better it's going to be able to work. But then you turn away from the ritual, from the tea ritual, from the Shinto ritual, from the mass, and you turn to see the world and you walk back into the ritual. Mm. You never leave it. And so it becomes, the ritual is sort of a practicing of opening up the world and then performing it. Mm. And now you can have rituals that close the world. And this is what I think Heidegger's concept of framing is. This is what I think Gestalt is. It's a ritual activity that makes me into a tourist. I come to Japan. I want to see Mount Fuji. I want to do some, get some good sushi. I want to see a geisha walking in the street. I've got my checklist, and I just do what tourists do. I become the Daoist man. I'm even worse than a Daoist man. I'm completely inframed in that structure. So rituals can have a clothing effect, but religious rituals are designed to constantly break you from the everyday, break you from that a closed framework, and then bring you back to it with an open mind and an open heart. So that it's a ritual that discloses and gets you to see the world and be in the world in a different way, as opposed to the framing. And this is yesterday's discussion about, this came up yesterday, you know, about the technology and stuff. And I think you go back to this and answer your question that way. Hopefully I answered your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay, the next question from Alessandro.
Just a quick question, because I'm not sure that of my understanding of one thing in the presentation, and is the part in which you spoke about sound metaphor, something like that. I'm not sure of why you use the word sound metaphor for the entire discourse of the susu. And I want just to ask you if you can understand explain me better this part, because I don't understand if it's something like an iconic moment or something like that. Just like when I don't know, it comes to my mind when Eduardo Con spoke about the Quechua tribe, and he spoke about one word that Quechua uses for means something like a pig that come into stagno, a pond, yeah, and it's something like splash. They don't use a splash, but it's something like that. And for the Quechua, it's like iconic, because there is no a relation between the act of the pig and the pond, but the entire act just it's unified, coming to mind when you use this word or something like that. There is not a causal connection, but just like a moment of a primal moment. I don't know if it's clear, but
No, I hadn't thought of things in that way, but I mean, and I'd have to think that through. As far as the sound metaphor, why call it a metaphor? Because it's not it goes back to the earlier discussion between this idea of something that's emotive and something that's sensible. And this is the fusion of the two. In fact, it's not even the fusion of the two, it's the creation of the two. And so it is always both emotive and sensible. It's a sensibility. And so it has its own presence, its own, it's so radically concrete and individual that it can't be made to refer to, it doesn't represent anything else. It is just itself, presence in itself. And yet that structure, that self-presencing has dynamic, polar structures in it. It is both sense and sensibility. And so it is a type of metaphor, because there's transferring going on. There's all the elements that you'd have in metaphor, but it's a radically unique boom. And so it's a building block. You can't tear it apart. You can't turn the mirror over and see what's behind. The Ur phenomena are just the very sheer presencing of the transient visible world. And it's very ultimate concreteness. It's suchness. And so this is the very fabric of the suchness. I'm not sure if that helped.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe not.
It's more clear. Thank you.
Is your turn?
Yeah. There was a sentence in Nishitani that bothered me from the beginning, and you brought it up again, and I want to comment on it, which is that strictly speaking, the idea of an empty sky is not an image. Lexicons are useful when you have clear denotations, but they often are very untrustworthy. When it comes to what Kim calls the lyrical infusion, the feeling that takes place consciously or unconsciously and breaks from the lexical denotations. So dictionaries abstract from the context that allows meaning to flow from one connotation to another. It allows the meaning to shift. But they're unreliable in the hands of a translator who doesn't have a sense of the lyrical in the language he's translating and the language he's translating to. Now, you talked about the example of Utsusu and all its variety of meanings and how the context changes the way it's to be translated. There is no lexical term for Utsusu. There's a variety of different meanings, and depending on the context, you have to shift between those and doing the work as a translator. And I think that's good, But the same thing is true for Nishitani's misunderstanding of the word image.
Right?
Nishitani's misunderstanding of the word image. I think he needs to be taught the same thing that you are teaching us about the word Utsusu. I mean, the meaning of it, it's a polysemic word, image, right? Likeness, it can be mental, it can be metaphorical, it can be non-visual, it can be sensual, it can be prepositional, it can be a cipher. And the image of the empty sky is fine in English, it's perfectly. The English mind makes an adjustment immediately to know what he's talking about. But Nishitani can't make that adjustment. He's stuck to, and I think that's comes back to the problem I mentioned yesterday. He's stuck to dealing with imagination through terms of Kant's conceptualization, or what we call the Vorstellung, whatever we're at, so his conceptualization. To deal with imagery when he has an entire 20th century of hermeneutics, as well as its reprisal of all the post-Enlightenment literary criticism to go on. He is completely ignorant of that, it seems. Well, I mean, he deals with imagery in ancient Japanese poetry, fine, but he doesn't grasp that words in other languages carry a variety of different meanings. So I think he could be taught the same thing about imagery that you teach about Utsusu. That's why reading through this, I find image. He keeps putting the English word in there, but he has no idea that it's a fluid concept. It's an ambiguous term. For him, it's got one meaning, but he has no idea of the ambiguity of the notion of imagination and image that he's dealing with. And it bothered me through the whole essay.
And I agree, and that's why at one point in my text, I have my problem with the translation is that a lot of distinctions were being leveled down to image. And I was trying to in one paragraph, I tried to bring them all out. And of course, the problem is I have to be able to say the Japanese flawlessly in order to make that paragraph work. But these were all different forms of image. And that's why I was saying I would translate this as image form, because I want to bring out the fact that there is the word kata or form image, because there's the word kata and image, right? Kaisho. And then here you have another image, and here you have another word, and here you have another word. And so I think he's trying to do it, but I agree with you, what you're saying, but I think he's trying to do it, but I don't think he does it. I don't think he's successful, as successful as he could have been. But he's trying to differentiate and defer what he means by image throughout the text. But I don't think he's going back down into his own language and he's not able to do it. So I agree with what you're saying, but I think I would actually say he's trying to do it.
Okay.
by going back into the Yamato language and trying to pull out words that would allow him to differentiate and defer what he means by image. But I wasn't able to pull that all out.
So we can move to a question from.
But I agree that he doesn't seem to have a good sense of what image in English means and build. And I was like, why are you doing this? This is confusing me.
Oh, yes, okay. I think it's turn of Professor Maraldo and then Professor Hiroshi. Please, Professor Maraldo.
Yes, Steve, that was quite an amazing paper, and there's no way my question can do justice to it, but maybe all I have is a wild idea. The idea is that, or the question is whether this kind of utsusu structure that you're laying out in its many meanings can be used to clarify what Nishitani is doing with the relation between form and emptiness and form. So let me back up a minute and say a little bit more to explain the question. So I'm trying to connect several phrases. One is the title, ku to soku. Another is perhaps the most classical expression of that, which Nishitani does not explicate in this essay, and that's the kusoku shiki shikizoku ku, which is one piece from the Heart Sutra, ignoring the other skandhas. So that's two phrases. The third is this koi teki ku, which is at the heart of what he's doing. And I agree that koi teki shouldn't, it's not good enough to translate it as emotional or emotive. I think the same is true of sensory. It's one of these polysemic words. Again, it's the like the shiki or the iro of the formula kusoku shiki is. And then the last phrase is, well, it's many words with similar pronunciation, utsusu, the polysemic word. So those four things are kind of, I'm juggling with them to understand what Nishitani is doing with the relationship between emptiness and forms. One thing he's doing is with his, I'm going to use the word image of the empty sky, or the sora, which is just another translation of ku, that, as you know, the kanji. And we have an idea of an empty sky when we read that phrase in English, but you can't really visualize it without forms, without sensible, sensed, felt, expressed, emoted, sensualized forms. Maybe one translation of koi teki ku would be aesthetic emptiness. But it's just a very peculiar expression, koi teki ku, because it's as if Nishitani is speaking about a ku with forms, a formed ku, a ku that, an emptiness that is there only by virtue of its forms, which is another way to read the emptiness soku ku. The ku soku shiki, the emptiness, and yet the emptiness, but also forms. So one question is whether this utsusu in its different translations, in its different senses, is a kind of translation of soku for Nishitani. The soku have the structure of this utsusu that you've been laying out. Another question, another way to raise the question is, if we speak of koi tekiku, of say aesthetic emptiness, is that something which transfers forms into emptiness? Is it something which moves us from emptiness into forms and vice versa? Are we the ones who are transferred into forms or move into forms? These are my rather wild ideas in hearing your presentation and trying to understand the ku to soku, which, by the way, does not have to be translated into English as two nouns, emptiness and soku. The soku doesn't have to be translated as a noun. It could be translated as and yet, but also, and at the same time, or the different ways that it has been translated into English, I think, qua or sive, using Latin expressions or whatever. But it sort of leaves you hanging because it's emptiness and what? Emptiness, but also what? Well, there's the different whats, the different forms, sensible forms that allow an empty sky to be visible, to be imagined. So without this utsusu process, without this kind of strange connection or contact without connection, I don't know, between emptiness and forms, that a dynamic between emptiness and forms, then the whole structure collapses. Anyway, so the basic question is, can the structure of utsusu in its different senses be used to explain how Nishitani understands the soku?
John, thank you very much. You're gracious as always, and insightful as always, and thought-provoking as always. The short answer is yes, and that was in fact that's the bottom line of the point I'm trying to make, is that soku is a type of biduality or a ko-utsutsu of both. And the reason that you always have to do a reversal, it's not because we're reading Derrida and we have to do reversals all the time, but if you do just form soku emptiness, stop there, you have only a one-way relationship, right? A is A because it is not B. And you have to do the reverse to make it clear that B is B because it is not A. And so the mirroring has to be bidirectional, and therefore you always have to have this reversal. In the Heart Sutra, I'm always, and I've been meaning to ask people who know better all this than I, but when I go back to the Heart Sutra, I find it interesting that the character that's being used for form there means color. And in fact, then if I do my research, it means more than form, it's the whole world. And so it is the phenomenal, colorful world reflects the emptiness. Well, now we're right back to the sky and emptiness. And the emptiness reflects the colorful world. And so we're talking about image and the importance of this word image and the fact that he doesn't, but for me, the most important word in the text is the sugata, which is a dynamic image. It's a form and image. It's moving. It's constantly. It's the leaves moving around. You know, I remember reading this, and I say the bell ringing because I heard the bell on my porch, and I thought there was somebody there, and I went out, and then I saw the leaves. Because it's autumn in Canada, and the leaves are just flowing around, and it's like, okay, the wind just came to say hello. You know, it's, you know, and so it's this aesthetic emptiness is the Sugata, but the Sugata is the ancient name of Buddha. There is nothing but Buddha nature. So these questions of which comes first, or these dualities, they don't play out if we were to get back to the sort of suchness of things. And I think this is where Nishitani starts. It's from that experience. So he's constantly trying to articulate back into that experience, not for himself, but for us. He's trying to sort of, you know, get us to go back down the rabbit hole into experience. In some ways, and he's doing all types of tricks to do it. So your question, does it move us into? I would say we're already there. We don't need to be brought into it. So yes, for me, I was trying to say that the Utsutsu is the structure of the soku. And it's also the structure of the Sugata. And it's therefore also the structure of the but I don't know if that
and then probably the final question from Professor Ohashi.
Thank you. I have some or several questions which could be related also to the question of Tobias-san and Marardo-san. And I would like to pose my questions in 3 or 4 viewpoints. The first viewpoint is grammatical. The second viewpoint is historical. The third viewpoint is semantic. And perhaps the fourth viewpoint is especially related to the Japanese language. And all therefore, I have 4 questions. The first question is related to one phrase you have quoted from Kasira. Kasira must have said that the function of adverb in all languages. Does he really says all languages? I ask this question because the grammatical category of adverb is limited to the European, Indo-German languages. And for example, we have in Japanese a category of adverb which is not differentiated from verb. The definition of verb has declination, this word has declination. Adverb not, but the Japanese adverb has also declination. For example, when we say sora wa aoi, the sky is blue, then we don't need is, the word is. Thus, we say the sky blue. The adverb blue has already a function of declination. So And my first question is related also to the problem of copula. Would you say, or Kasira will say that also copula is common to all languages? I ask this question because I think about, very often I think about the Platonic expression, Platonic question, T estin, what is? T estin, in Japanese or in Chinese languages, we don't need the word estin. There is a word of question, T, nani. T alone suffers to ask what is. But when it is asked with the grammatical form T estin, what is, then the direction of thinking or the direction of the answer is already given. What is, with this question, is something about essence, is somehow somehow expected in advance. And thinking, philosophical thinking of essence, that is the fundamental direction of European philosophical languages. And Heidegger says that is just the way of thinking in which the being itself is forgotten. So that my first question is if you or Kasira will say that copula is common to all languages. The second question is regard the historical aspect of a language. When you say bunka, you have explained the word bunka, but this word has also historical aspect, which is not quite reflected in linguistic explanation. Namely, so far as I have once researched, the first case in which the word bunka is used is in the Edo period, a period named Bunka Bunsei, epoch of Bunka Bunsei. And this word bunka comes from a Chinese expression, namely, with bun, educate the folk. Bun o motte tami o kasuru. Educate, namely, that is a special point. Bunka, the concept of bunka, which was imported or used since the Meiji era, was the expression which was given from above, from the ruler, while the European word for culture comes from cultura. Namely, that cultura cultivation of the earth, and that is agricultural term. And culture, cultura was something which was produced by the folk, not as a concept given from above as ruler. That is, for me, interesting difference between European word of culture or cultura and Japanese or Chinese concept of bunka. So every word has an historical aspect which could enrich some reflections on the grammatical explanation. The third aspect is semantic, namely, the main subject of your lecture is utsusu. And Abe-san has pointed out that there is also another word, utsuroi. I would like to point out one more word, namely utsuro.
Void.
Utsuro is void, voidness.
Mm.
And this connotation, I don't know, of course, if etymologically utsuro and utsusu is connected with each other. But I have also once engaged with this word utsusu, utsuru, and so forth. And utsuro is voidness, and perhaps in the usage of Japanese languages, utsusu has something to do also with the feeling of voidness. So that is a semantic aspect which could also enrich your reflection. The final fourth question has something to do with also with the first question, namely the problem of copula. And Nakai must have said that in case of a haiku of basho, something discontinuous continuity is expressed without copula. Okay. My question is, has something to do with the special character of Japanese language. The haiku of basho reads, Furuike ya kawazu tobikomu mizu no oto. This word ya is named in Japanese grammar as like in German we say Schnitt Silbe, cut, Schnitt Silbe, what is it? Cut.
Inward. It's
The cut word, cut letter.
Cut word.
Cut word.
Yes, cut word. And this cut word has also emotional meaning. Furuike ya. With this cut word, of course, a kind of discontinuous continuity is expressed, and at the same time, special feeling is expressed. And would you have some interpretation to this cut word or the emotional element of this cut, discontinuity, which has also something to do with ma, which you have also mentioned in your lecture. So far, my 4 questions, linguistic 4 questions.
I'm usually graced with one of your questions. It usually takes me a long time to even understand and deal with. I'm now graced with not 1, but 4 sets of questions. I would say that each question is a set. So the grammatical structure is every language have an adverb structure. Kusira is careful to never suggest that there is some type of meta framework, grammatical framework for language. Every language develops its own grammatical framework. However, and he's also careful to say that some grammatical frameworks don't exist at some point in language. So languages are mobile. I see.
I think, Professor Ohashi, that you mistook adjective for adverb. The adverb is a fuxi.
Yeah, that was going to be my.
Not a keyoshi.
Yeah,
Keyoshi.
Yeah, keyoshi is adjective. You said adverb.
Adverb.
The verb is fuxi.
No. So according to my understanding,
Yeah.
so there is a usage of doshi, so
Verbs.
verb, which can be used as a verb as well.
Yeah.
This is the point of Professor Ohaji's first question.
Yes,
right.
and-
Keio, for example, so keio doshi, you mean, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
but that's adjective.
No,
No.
it's adverbs. The adverbs and the verbs. It also says this. I was my quote is I'm pulling stuff out, and so at the end of the day,
That's adjective.
For example, so for example, we can say, as Professor Ohaji mentioned, Sora wa aoi, as the sky is blue.
Yeah.
But this blue, of course, this is not an adverb, but we could say aoku. This is a good example, but
So just to go back to the question, the answer is he is saying that all languages have adverbs, verbs, but he does recognize that some languages, the adverb and verb are interchangeable. And so Japanese would be one of these examples. And he does articulate this. As far as the copula goes, he argues that the copula is implicit in all languages, but it doesn't take the same form in all languages, and therefore it can come out as different. So there is no language. There are just historical languages. And when you're trying to create a transcendental theory of a culture or a language of art, it's sometimes difficult to speak about every language. And somebody says, well, there's not this and that. And Kassir would just say, yeah, that's fine. It's not it. I can deal with that. So the second is the historical thing, the bunka.
Can I give one example? The letter rain, or I would say kanashi, sad. The letter for sad or sadness can also mean I am sad, and sadly with the feeling of sadness, and in feeling sad. Adjective and adverb, both, and also a verb.
Yeah. Yes. All three. Yes.
So,
of course, all adjectives never.
This explanation is derived from the viewpoint of European Indo-German languages. That is the point.
Yeah, and
this is Heiyodoshi. Yes,
and that is a limitation of Kassir's original research. Is that he's originally I was very happy with the theory of Kassir from beginning to end, and then I made the mistake of coming to Japan, and I was in a seminar and mentioned, well, Shinto religion, and somebody said, oh no, Shinto is not a religion, and I said, well, Buddhist religion, and someone said, no, Buddhism is not a religion, and then someone said, yeah, Buddhism is a religion. And then the whole nature of aesthetics and what is art, all of this got thrown out by my experience of Japan. Thank you very much. But I didn't throw away the project of saying that there is some transcendental framework of worlding. And that these things, and the more I've read, the more I've found the similitudes, the parallels, and it's a very difficult thing to talk about the transcendental structure without talking about the content, and that's the tightrope I'm trying to walk. So you're absolutely right, Shohashi Sensei, about the verb adverb. There is a place where Kassir would agree with you.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't nullify his point that even when you get to the verb-adverb structures, it would function in exactly the same way that he's talking about. And that's why I gave an example of the hiragana which then you would have in all these other colors that reflected blue, red, tomorrow, today, they all things that have this brightness to them. And most people don't even hear it, but it's how the original architectural language that forms the framework comes up and keeps echoing through. And this is what I think Nishitani's hooking into, and he's trying to go back to that Yamamoto structure that he thinks is still living there.
Yes, exactly.
In the sounds.
And I would add here that not all languages have the parts of speech, adjective, adverb, so some of them overlap. But Kasuru's point is that there are no verbs that are pure. There's no language with pure verbs. Verbs can be qualified.
Yeah.
That's what an adverb is, something that qualifies a verb. Action takes place in context in all languages. So that's all it means. It doesn't mean that that part of speech fits in all languages, because it doesn't fit in many languages.
Yeah.
The English parts, and they overlap in Japanese. But the point, I think, is still correct, exactly as you say.
So then it's to the historical thing about bunka. As you know, you provoked me to understand what bunka meant, and it's a very important question, because if I'm going to do a philosophy of culture and I want to recognize the fact that every concept of culture is a concept of culture, that is to say, every concept of what culture is belongs to a specific historical culture, then I have to stop using words like art, religion, myth, and culture, and go back in and see what is the language. What's the terms there? And so, of course, bunka is the framework. And you're right to mention that, you know, the European concept of culture goes back to the exploitation of nature. But it's not for nothing that the word colonization comes from the same root as culture, as a culturalization, as what the word colonization, it comes from the exact same root. But I don't think you could bunkaize by somebody. It would make no sense to do that, right? So there is this different relationship. There's not this other nature, this nature as an other that has to be somehow exploited or opened up in the Heideggerian way or the European way. And so it changes your very sense of nature, the world, and of course then the person in the world. And sure, you're right to say that when you have a concept like bunka, you start from the whole and move in to the individual. And so the individual is ultimately relational from the beginning. Whereas in the European culture, version of culture, you're moving from the individual out. And then you have other problems to deal with. And so the very image of what we're talking about, I think, is important. And I didn't know about the Edo thing, but I just don't know how to deal with it. In terms of the systematic question, thank you very much. I mean, the more I researched this idea of utsutsu, the more words kept coming up, and I'm disadvantaged that I can't just open up an etymological Japanese dictionary and fly through it all day long. I don't have that sensibility that it's not in my mouth. It's not like a taste that I can taste. You know, you see the light. You know, when you come back home to a place you haven't been for a while, the first things that strike you are all the sensible things, the smells, the smell of the street, the smell of if I go to Belgium, I smell golf, and as soon as I smell that golf, I know I'm back to where I really intellectually started growing. When I come to Canada, it's the light. There is a quality of light that it's nowhere else in the world. It is that light and that spot. And when language is the same thing. I unfortunately just don't have that. I can't hear the sounds, so I can understand intellectually this stuff, but I can't aesthetically believe it and live it the way you do. And so thank you very much for this extra word. I will I will add that to the whole thing. In terms of the copula, this is the most difficult question because it would require that I return to the word aru and ari and discuss the relationship between ari and aru. There's no ari without aru, and there's no aru without ari. And then, of course, how that functions in Japanese language and into the Japanese world, as opposed to a copula, is important. Then, of course, the function of the ga. And Nishitani brings this up in his text. And one of the things I wanted to do is go through the text and show how the ga is working in his own text, how he's using the ga. Because I think he brings it up, and I don't believe that he's just made it one example. I think he's driven it home. And when I read that, I couldn't help but think of Nishida's inquiry into the good in the chapter on pure experience, where his example of pure experience is horse running, which goes to this idea of the adjective. There is no subject. There is no, it is, a horse is running. There is no copula. And this is the immediate sensible aesthetic experience of the event or happening. And then when you say the horse ga running, the ga introduces a subjectivity. It says it is the horse that is doing the running as opposed to something. So when I say it is the wind that is blowing, I've already separated from the sugata, this image, and created some type of metaphysical existence that does the blowing of the wind, of the leaves. But the leaves, the experience of the leaves moving is the wind. Visibility and the invisibility are one. It's only if I introduce the ga that I can then split off and say there's something that's invisible as opposed to visible. That distinction is artificial. And that's where prose comes in. While the roots of Japanese are in this aru, and that's what creates a different worldview. You have a ga, and a ga has a function of creating a type of copula, I would argue. But now we're at the limit of my ability to understand Japanese language. I mean, I'm new to Japanese language. I clearly don't have the linguistic skills or background that any of you do have in Japan. So and as far as the cut word goes and special feeling, my text began and ends with a haiku from Basho, which is one of my favorites. And the problem of translating this haiku has always fascinated me. So you all know that the frog haiku, the first line is furu iki ya. And you look at all the translations, the ya just drops off, right? There's no problem with old, furu, and old or ancient. I would go with the ancient. Ike, pond. Okay, so far we're not, the translation is not difficult. And then everyone sort of goes off into the next image. But the ya gets dropped. Why? Because there is no way of getting the ya outside of Japanese. It means and, but it's an and that is not like a to, which is a list of things, but it's a ya, it assumes, it implies a list. It implies and something, but it doesn't tell you what it is. So it leaves I got John Moraldo is about to disagree with me, but I'm reasonably sure that the ya, the to is, you got a to be, whereas I can just throw in the ya, and I don't have to tell you what comes after it. It's either it's implied or it doesn't have to be. And this is how I understood the ya. But it's just this one sound. It's got a feeling to it, and that's what creates the whole dynamic of this haiku, right? It's the ancient pond. And it takes you away from the pond to shunyata, to emptiness. And the way I would read this haiku in terms of Nakai is that is a cut word that creates a standalone image that is reflecting the ancient pond, that is to say, Buddha nature. So it's an image, it's like the sky, it's a reflection of Buddha nature, of emptiness. That's what the old ancient pond here is. And then the next image, which is a complete standalone image, is frog jumping. Just frog jumping. It has nothing to do with the first image. If we put it together, that's because we put it together. It's just one image, second image, and then there's a sound of water. Sound of water. A sensible, everyday thing. And so these three images function together to create our world.
Would you say that this can also be a case of a place in which utsu and soku are at the same time expressed, as Marardo Sensei has asked, if utsu and soku can be the same?
Yes.
Would you say is just a place in which utsu happens,
Yes.
and
Yes.
also different scenes are connected with each other, with with a feeling of admiration.
Yes.
Yes.
And simply, this is the first time I've got a simple answer to it. Yes. Yes. You've precisely said what I would like to say.
Mm-hmm.
Just better said. I think John Morado still wants to disagree with my interpretation of the but that's okay.
Can I stick my tongue in for just a second? So your Ohashi Sensei's reading of the as the place and the transferability of the old pond and then the frog jumping in, that's very interesting. It's to read it as a Nishidan pure experience, like running horse, right? It's one event. Okay. However, there's a kind of progression in the reading of it. Otherwise, the cutting word, the kireji, wouldn't be there. The kireji introduces a cut, which is a transference, a movement through time. So you have the image, to use that bad word again, an image of a still pond. But what happens? Something happens to it. A frog jumps in.
But where's
there's
still?
The sound.
Where's the word still? Furo iki.
Oh, okay. Well, there's no word still. I'm just giving an interpretation. I mean, it does have a cutting. So there's a cut between one thing and another. You've got an action. You've got an action in the jumping in, and that's contrasted with the implicit stillness of the pond. Maybe the pond isn't still. Maybe there's some ripples in it. That's not a big matter. But the also doesn't. I don't think that has anything to do with the as this that a list of things. I think it's just an exclamation, and sometimes it is. It isn't left off. There's it's translated as an exclamation point, or as one of the expressions you gave, Steve, the ancient pond, or something like that. Anyway, That's all. That's enough. Sorry.
The is now in Andrew Fitzsimons's translation of the entire all the haiku of Basho. Though in fact he produced a very ugly line, "an olden pond now," which is quite unpronounceable. NDN. This is a big sensation in the world of Irish poetry now.
And if I allow me to add one more word, comment. Would you say, Lofts sensei or Maraldo sensei, would you say that this ya in logical aspect could be identified with soku? I once attempted to explain this word soku in comparison with or in confrontation with Hegelian logic. And the key word in the Hegelian logic is transparency. And this transparency was till now never treated in the research of Hegelian logics. But transparency is quite interesting and important term, above all in the third part of Hegelian logic. And soku can also be when we attempt to understand it in somehow logical aspect. Soku is also the area of transparency in which different scenes can be seen, overlapped, and transferred. And that is my comment. And of course, I must. I have published this article in German language, not in English, and in a magazine of Hegelian Society. But the logical research of the concept soku is not yet accomplished or completed.
It's interesting. It's interesting.
Will require further research that, but at any rate, in a short haiku, in cut word, yeah, this transparency is also expressed quite concretely with a feeling. However, this feeling is something which is not expressed in Hegelian logic. So far, my comment.
Thank you very much.